June 19, 1944. The Philippine Sea shimmered under a harsh morning sun, its expanse stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Beneath those waves, 80 young Americans lay silent, listening to the hum of their submarine's machinery and the faint, distant rumble of war. The USS Cavalla, only 4 months out of the shipyard, was about to etch her name into history. In the cramped, sweat-soaked conning tower, Lieutenant Commander Herman J. Kossler steadied his periscope and whispered the order that would decide not just his crew's fate, but the course of the Pacific War. 6 torpedoes, all hot, straight, and running true, were about to race toward one of Japan's most feared aircraft carriers. The Shokaku, veteran of Pearl Harbor, survivor of Coral Sea, a steel leviathan thought unsinkable. The tension in the submarine was electric, a kind of controlled terror. Men clutched their tools, their pencils, their rosary beads. They knew what success would mean: glory, revenge, and strategic triumph, but they also knew the cost. A single mistake, a flash of their periscope, the white wake of their torpedoes spotted too soon, and destroyers circling above would crush them with depth charges. There were 52 American submarines already lost in the Pacific. The men of the Cavalier understood that this attack could easily add them to the list. Yet here they were, perfectly positioned after days of stalking, their prey broadside and vulnerable. It was the culmination of months of training and years of technological evolution. The Japanese still clung to the myth that courage and skill could outweigh machinery and mathematics. But the Americans had embraced a new truth. In modern war, innovation and precision outweighed even the fiercest spirit. That lesson was about to be written in fire and steel. The Shokaku was more than a ship. To the Japanese, she was a symbol. She had launched aircraft during the attack on Pearl Harbor, had carried squadrons into the battles of Coral Sea and Santa Cruz, and had repeatedly survived hits that should have sunk her. Her very name meant soaring crane, a poetic reflection of Japanese pride in their carrier fleet. For American sailors, however, spotting her silhouette through the periscope lens meant something else entirely: a chance to strike down a Pearl Harbor raider and repay old debts with interest. But before this moment in June, there was a journey. The USS Cavalla herself had been born not in battle, but in the steel mills and shipyards of Connecticut. She was part of a tidal wave of American industry that Japan could never match. By 1944, the United States was launching a new submarine every 17 days. Factories across 23 states built her parts, 1.5 million man-hours forged her body. Where Japan relied on shrinking pools of craftsmen and pilots trained in tradition, America mobilized entire cities into an industrial symphony. The Cavalier was not just a weapon. She was the embodiment of democracy's arsenal. Her crew was young, average age just 23. Many had never been to sea before the war. Some came from farms, others from factories, still others from college campuses. Now they shared bunks, sweat, and fear in a steel tube designed to hunt giants. Their captain, Herman Kossler, was no stranger to this deadly game. A Naval Academy graduate, he had already helped sink over 50,000 tons of Japanese shipping aboard another submarine. But now command rested solely on his shoulders. His decisions alone would steer Cavalier between victory and annihilation. On May 31, 1944, the Cavalier left Pearl Harbor for her first patrol. Her orders were simple but daunting: relieve another sub on station and patrol the eastern Philippines. But fate had larger plans. Within weeks, codebreakers at Pearl Harbor had decrypted Japanese signals, revealing the movement of Vice Admiral Ozawa's massive carrier fleet toward the Mariana Islands. American Marines had just landed on Saipan, and if Japanese carriers broke through, the invasion could be destroyed. Suddenly, the Cavalier's mission was no routine patrol, it was destiny. By June 17th, her radar screens lit up with faint echoes, multiple ships, zigzagging fast, an armada on the move. Kossler and his men realized they had stumbled upon the heart of the Imperial Navy's striking force: battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and most importantly, carriers. The hunt was on. The sight on the radar scope was almost unbelievable. 9 carriers, 5 battleships, 13 cruisers, nearly 30 destroyers. A steel fortress sweeping across the Philippine Sea. For the young men of Cavalla, the magnitude of what they had found defied imagination. This was not just another convoy of freighters or tankers to ambush. This was the beating heart of Japanese naval aviation, a force designed to deliver a decisive blow against the American invasion of Saipan. If these carriers struck, thousands of Marines on the beaches could be slaughtered, and months of hard-fought progress might unravel. Kossler knew his responsibility. The standing orders were clear. Intelligence came first. Even if it meant giving up a perfect shot, the priority was to alert Admiral Raymond Spruance and Task Force 58. At 10 p.m., Cavalla surfaced just long enough to send a burst transmission. The message was short, but it carried enormous weight. Large enemy task force, latitude 12 degrees north, longitude 135 degrees east, course 290, speed 19, many large and small ships. Within minutes, Spruance had the coordinates he needed. The Battle of the Philippine Sea, the largest carrier battle in history, was now set in motion. But with that message came peril. Japanese radio direction finders triangulated the source almost instantly. 2 destroyers peeled off from the fleet and came racing toward the submarine's estimated position. Kossler barked orders. Crash dive. Engines roared, ballast tanks blew, and the Cavalla slipped beneath the waves, plunging into the black depths. Moments later, the sea above exploded. Depth charges thundered around the submarine, each one a hammer blow shaking steel, popping light bulbs and rattling teeth. The men lay still in their bunks, sweat dripping, counting the seconds between detonations. For 3 hours, the destroyers circled and pounded them. The air grew thick, heavy with the stench of oil and fear. Temperatures soared past 110 degrees, condensation dripping from pipes, puddling on the steel floor. Oxygen thinned. The men stripped down to their underwear, breathing shallowly, praying silently. They had volunteered for this war, but no one imagined hell would sound like dozens of depth charges crashing down in rhythmic fury. 42 detonations later, the ocean finally grew quiet. The destroyers had moved on. Somehow, against odds, Cavalla had survived. Kossler made a decision then. He could have slunk away to safety, claiming his role as scout fulfilled. But something deeper drove him forward. He knew the Japanese would soon need to recover their aircraft after the morning strike. That meant carriers would slow, turn into the wind, and expose their flanks. If he could position Cavalla just right, the opportunity of a lifetime might come. So instead of retreating, he ordered a high-speed pursuit, chasing shadows on the horizon. The gamble paid off. At dawn on June 19th, aircraft began appearing overhead, dozens of them, all racing east toward the American fleet. This was the Japanese strike force, hurling everything they had in one desperate gamble to break Saipan. For Cavalla's crew, the sight meant only one thing. The enemy carriers had to recover those planes. They were out there, close, waiting. Sound operators picked up the churn of high-speed propellers. Radar confirmed multiple ships at range. And then, through the periscope, Kossler saw it. A carrier task group, 3 flat tops steaming hard, destroyers bristling around them. Among them loomed a massive silhouette with a distinctive island structure. Recognition officer David McClung squinted at his cards, then whispered the confirmation that sent chills through the conning tower. "That's Shokaku, Captain, Pearl Harbor veteran." The same ship that had launched waves of bombers against American sailors in December 1940, one was now in their crosshairs. To the young men of Cavalla, it felt like fate had brought them here, beneath the very giant that had once seemed untouchable. At that moment, the war became personal. They were no longer just sailors in a steel tube. They were avengers, poised to strike at the heart of the empire that had bombed Pearl Harbor and plunged their country into war. Kossler adjusted the periscope, his voice calm but resolute. The time for waiting was over. The Cavalla had found her mark. The approach was a chess game played in silence and shadows. Every 60 seconds, Kossler raised the periscope for just 3 seconds, then lowered it again before enemy lookouts could catch the glint of sunlight on glass. Each brief glance brought an update: bearing, range, target angle. The torpedo data computer clattered and clicked, its analog gears solving trigonometric equations faster than any human crewman could. The men in the conning tower barely spoke, only the occasional whisper as numbers were called out, relayed, and fed into the machine that would determine life or death. The Shokaku was broadside now, her starboard flank gleaming in the tropical sun. She had turned into the wind to recover her aircraft, her deck alive with motion. Japanese pilots clambered from cockpits, deck crews scrambled to secure planes, fuel hoses snaked across the planks. It was the moment of maximum vulnerability, a predator pausing to breathe in full view of the hunter beneath the waves. But danger hovered close. A Japanese destroyer, later identified as Urikaze, suddenly appeared on an intercept course. Perhaps it had spotted a faint ripple from Cavalla's periscope, or perhaps the opening of torpedo tube doors had caught the glint of light. Whatever the reason, it was bearing down fast. In those few seconds, Kossler faced a choice that could seal his fate. Dive deep and lose the perfect shot, or risk it all and fire. His decision was instant. Fire one. Torpedo doors slammed open, compressed air hissed, and the first of 6 Mark 14 torpedoes shot forward into the sea. Then another, and another. 6 steel fish, each weighing over 3,000 pounds and carrying nearly 700 pounds of high explosive, sped toward the carrier at 46 knots. The crew held their breath, counting off seconds in their heads. 30 seconds to impact. 25, 20. The destroyer closed in, its bow wave foaming, but still Kossler kept his eyes fixed on the periscope. Then impact. A dull thud reverberated through the ocean. A column of water and fire leapt skyward from Shokaku's side. A second detonation followed, then a third. In the space of 20 seconds, the soaring crane shuddered violently as her starboard side was ripped open. Aviation fuel tanks ruptured, flooding compartments with burning liquid. Secondary explosions tore through the forward engine room. Smoke poured from her stern. On Cavalla, there was no time to cheer. The destroyer was almost on top of them. Kossler ordered, "Dive, emergency dive, take her to 400 feet." It was deeper than the submarine was designed to go, beyond its rated test depth, but hesitation meant death. Alarms blared, valves groaned, and the boat angled sharply downward. As she plunged, the crew braced for the inevitable counterattack. Depth charges followed within minutes. The first pattern detonated so close that light fixtures shattered, showering glass across the control room. Another explosion warped a hatch seal, sending seawater spraying into the forward torpedo room. Men grabbed buckets, forming a chain to bail in suffocating heat. The submarine was blind now, sound gear knocked out by a near miss. In the darkness, sweat poured down bodies, eyes stung with salt, lungs burned with the stifling air. For more than 3 hours, Japanese destroyers rained down over 100 depth charges, each one a thunderclap that bent steel and rattled bones. And yet, even as Cavalla endured the pounding, something remarkable was happening above. The Shokaku, mortally wounded, fought to survive. Damage control teams battled flames with hoses and buckets, desperate to contain the inferno. Pilots trapped on deck scrambled to escape the spreading fires. But at 2:10 p.m., nearly 3 hours after the torpedoes struck, the inevitable came. Vapors from ruptured fuel tanks ignited in a cataclysmic blast. Witnesses later recalled seeing the carrier's deck buckle, her hull split nearly in two, and her forward elevator blasted skyward like a rocket before crashing into the sea. The soaring crane was gone. In minutes, she rolled, capsized, and disappeared beneath the waves, taking nearly 1,100 men with her. The ocean boiled with oil, smoke, and wreckage. For the Japanese Navy, it was not merely the loss of a ship. It was the loss of pride, of irreplaceable pilots, of a symbol they could never replace. Inside Cavalla, the men had no way of knowing the scale of destruction above. What they heard instead was the language of war in the deep, muffled roars, groans of metal collapsing, the low, eerie rumble of a dying ship. At 2:10, four massive detonations rolled through the water, so powerful that the submarine shuddered even hundreds of feet below. Sailors exchanged glances, unspoken recognition passing among them. Something big had died. Still, survival remained uncertain. Three destroyers circled overhead, laying patterns of depth charges with ruthless precision. The explosions came in clusters, some close enough to dent the hull and strip paint, others so near that bolts rattled loose and pipes sprayed mist across the control room. Temperatures climbed above 120 degrees. The men were drenched, not just in sweat, but in seawater leaking from ruptured seals. Air grew heavy, almost unbreathable. Yet no one panicked. They whispered prayers, cursed under their breath, or simply endured. After 3 hours and 106 depth charges, the ocean grew quiet. The Japanese had shifted focus to rescue operations for their floundering carrier. When Cavalla finally rose to periscope depth, the sight was staggering. The horizon was littered with oil slicks, drifting wreckage, and lifeboats crowded with survivors. Smoke plumes marked the grave of Shokaku. Destroyers hovered nearby, their bows dipping as they pulled exhausted men from the sea. Kossler dared not linger long, every minute risked discovery, but even a brief look confirmed what the crew suspected. They had struck a mortal blow. That night, as dusk fell, Cavalla surfaced. Men staggered onto the deck, gasping for fresh air after 9 suffocating hours below. Some collapsed in exhaustion. Others grinned despite their fatigue, their faces streaked with oil and salt. They had not just survived. They had avenged Pearl Harbor. Word traveled fast. When Kossler radioed his report, hit Shokaku-class carrier with 3 torpedoes, heard 4 terrific explosions 2 hours later, believed she sank, it was relayed to Pearl Harbor and then to Admiral Spruance himself. Though the submarine had endured its own gauntlet, its torpedoes had helped set the stage for what historians would call the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. While Cavalla hunted below, American Hellcats ruled the skies above. Guided by radar, flown by well-trained aviators, they tore through Japanese air groups, downing over 300 aircraft in a single day. By nightfall, Japan had lost nearly all of its veteran carrier pilots. The contrast was brutal. America's industrial engine was in full stride, producing new planes and training new pilots faster than Japan could replace them. Japan's once feared naval aviation force was now bleeding out, its edge dulled beyond repair. The loss of Shokaku compounded the disaster. Not only had the Japanese lost one of their last remaining fleet carriers, but they had also lost hundreds of skilled crewmen and dozens of veteran aviators. For Japan, this wasn't just a setback, it was the beginning of collapse. Back in the submarine's mess, the crew celebrated quietly with coffee and jokes, but Kossler knew better than to revel too soon. He reminded them that 52 American submarines had already been lost in the Pacific. Luck, training, and determination had saved them today, but tomorrow could be different. His job was to keep them sharp, alive, and ready for the next patrol. What none of them fully realized was just how much their single patrol had shifted the course of the war. By striking down Shokaku, Cavalla had crippled Japan's ability to contest American carrier forces. By relaying her position, she had given Spruance the edge he needed to plan his strikes. Submarines, often overlooked in tales of grand battleships and carriers, had proven once again to be silent giants, able to strangle an empire from beneath the sea. July 1st, 1944. After days of empty patrol, Cavalla received new orders: proceed to Saipan. As she approached, the crew saw a panorama unlike anything they could have imagined. Battleships hurled shells inland, carriers launched wave after wave of aircraft, transports unloaded supplies, while Marines pressed forward through smoke and fire. The sea seemed alive with American steel, a testament to industrial might on a scale no empire could match. For the young submariners who had endured heat, terror, and depth charges, the sight was electrifying. They had played their part in making this vast invasion possible. When Cavalla tied up alongside the tender USS Holland, word of her achievement spread quickly. Sailors from other submarines came to see the boat that had sunk Shokaku. Cheers erupted as crewmen swapped stories, shaking hands with the men who had survived the onslaught. Admiral Charles Lockwood himself would later board Cavalla to congratulate them, awarding the boat a Presidential Unit Citation for extraordinary heroism. The crew took pride not just in their victory, but in surviving when so many submarines never returned from patrol. In Japan, the news was buried. Official communiques listed Shokaku as damaged and under repair, masking the truth to preserve morale. But within the Imperial Navy, the blow was crushing. Shokaku had been a symbol of resilience, a veteran of Coral Sea and Santa Cruz, a carrier that had survived what would have sunk lesser ships. Her loss, alongside the sinking of Tejo the very same day, convinced many officers that the war was no longer winnable. Commander Fuchida Mitsuo, who had led the attack on Pearl Harbor, later admitted, "When we learned Shokaku was gone, we knew the war was lost. She was more than a ship. She was the heart of our carrier force." For the Japanese aviators, the loss was even more devastating. Hundreds of trained pilots perished, including veterans who had once terrorized skies over Pearl Harbor and the Indian Ocean. These were not just names on a roster. They were the instructors, the mentors, the foundation of future squadrons. Their deaths left Japan with aircraft it could still build, but no men capable of flying them effectively. By contrast, American training schools were turning out pilots in staggering numbers, backed by resources Japan could never hope to match. As months passed, Cavalla went on to complete 5 more patrols. She would sink the destroyer Shimatsuki, attack convoys, and stalk Japanese waters that had once seemed untouchable. By war's end, her record would stand at over 34,000 tons of shipping sunk, with not a single crewman lost in combat. She became a symbol of the silent service's decisive contribution to victory in the Pacific. Yet behind the numbers lay a human cost no statistic could capture. More than 1,000 men went down with Shokaku, leaving families who never knew their final moments. For Cavalla's crew, the sounds of those explosions and the knowledge of what they had done stayed with them for life. Many never spoke of it outside reunions, carrying silent burdens in the way veterans often do. Duty had demanded their actions, but memory demanded their humility. Years later, when Cavalla was preserved as a museum in Galveston, Texas, veterans returned to walk her narrow passageways once more. Some stood in the conning tower, touching the same periscope through which Kossler had watched history change. Others visited the memorial plaques, honoring the 52 submarines lost, boats that remain on eternal patrol. At reunions, they spoke not of triumph, but of sacrifice, of brave enemies, of lost shipmates, of the heavy price of victory. The story of Cavalla and the fall of Shokaku is more than a tale of torpedoes and tactics. It is the story of ordinary men asked to perform extraordinary feats, of technology meeting courage, of democracy's vast resources overcoming an empire's fading spirit. On June 19, 1944, 6 torpedoes sped across the Philippine Sea and struck not just a carrier, but the heart of Japan's naval power. In their wake, the course of history bent toward victory.